After nearly 4 years of war in Eastern Europe, a new diplomatic chapter may be unfolding. In Abu Dhabi, representatives from Kyiv, Moscow, and Washington concluded the first substantive trilateral talks since the conflict began. The headline result, a 314-prisoner exchange. But beneath that breakthrough lies a far deeper question. Is this the beginning of a fair peace, or the architecture of a forced settlement shaped by great power politics? Abu Dhabi is not just a neutral venue. It represents the emergence of middle power diplomacy in a fragmented global order. For the first time in years, Ukraine and Russia sat across the table, with Washington directly engaged. President Volodymyr Zelensky described the negotiations as not easy, a phrase that reveals more than it conceals, because the core issue is not prisoners, it is territory, security guarantees, and the future shape of Eastern Europe. According to analysts, any settlement must address three structural tensions. 1. Border sovereignty. 2. NATO expansion. 3. Long-term security architecture in Europe. And none of these are simple. A major development in these talks is the appointment of a new U.S. envoy. This signals something significant. Washington may be recalibrating its strategy. Is this still about supporting Ukraine's full territorial sovereignty, or is it about managing escalation and redefining spheres of influence? Historically, Eastern European borders have been shaped through great power negotiations, often without smaller nations fully dictating the terms. If Washington and Moscow move toward a bilateral understanding, what role remains for Kyiv? And more importantly, what role remains for Brussels? This is where the geopolitical stakes expand. If these talks evolve into a U.S.-Russia channel, the European Union risks strategic marginalization. For years, the EU positioned itself as a primary stakeholder in the Ukraine conflict, economically, militarily, and politically. But diplomacy at this scale often consolidates power among the largest actors. A bilateral sphere of influence model would represent a major shift in post-Cold War European order. And that raises profound questions. Is Europe prepared to assert independent security leadership, or will it follow Washington's negotiated framework? The future of EU relevance may depend on whether Europe develops autonomous defense coordination beyond NATO dependency. A prisoner exchange creates optimism, but peace agreements are not judged by symbolism, they are judged by sustainability. If Ukraine is pressured into territorial concessions, critics may label it a forced peace. If Russia emerges with tacit recognition of occupied zones, it could set a precedent for future conflicts. And if Washington prioritizes de-escalation over structural justice, the global message may be clear: power defines borders. For smaller nations worldwide, that implication matters deeply. This negotiation extends beyond Ukraine. It becomes a test case for 21st century conflict resolution. If spheres of influence return as accepted diplomatic doctrine, we may see ripple effects in the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East, the South Caucasus. Great power bargaining could reemerge as the dominant stabilizing model, reducing multilateral institutions to secondary roles. And that would mark a profound shift in global order. Timing may be the most decisive factor in Abu Dhabi. After years of attrition, all sides are recalculating. Ukraine faces war fatigue, economically, militarily, and socially. Russia confronts sustained sanctions pressure and battlefield costs. And Washington enters an election-sensitive policy cycle where foreign commitments are increasingly scrutinized. Negotiations rarely begin from ideal conditions. They begin when leverage stabilizes. The prisoner swap suggests tactical cooperation is possible, but strategic compromise remains far more complex. Energy markets, reconstruction financing, and long-term security guarantees now shape the bargaining space. Europe's dependence on diversified energy supplies, America's global deterrence posture, and Russia's regional ambitions all intersect in this diplomatic corridor. The question is not simply whether peace is achievable, it is whether the structure of that peace reinforces international norms or quietly redraws them. Abu Dhabi may therefore represent more than mediation. It may represent a recalibration of how wars end in the 21st century. Beyond the negotiating table, domestic politics will shape every concession. Public opinion in Ukraine, elite calculations in Moscow, and congressional dynamics in Washington will all influence how far leaders can move. Peace frameworks are not signed in isolation. They must survive political scrutiny at home to endure internationally. The Abu Dhabi talks are not a peace agreement. They are a signal that diplomacy is reopening, but also that power politics remains central. Whether this becomes a fair deal or a forced peace depends on three variables. 1. Ukraine's negotiating leverage. 2. U.S. strategic priorities. 3. Europe's political cohesion. The coming months will reveal whether Eastern Europe's borders are secured through law or recalibrated through leverage. For deeper geopolitical analysis, strategic breakdowns, and regional security insights, visit nexusinsight.org. Subscribe.